Hey everyone, here we are with another episode of Bethel Backstage. This is part 2, where you, our church, asked some questions to us on anxiety. So if you missed part 1, I would encourage you to go back and watch that. But here once again with our senior pastor, Steve DeWitt, of 25, almost 26 years. Pastor Stephen with 2 PhDs, almost.
Dr.
Ganschow, and me, who just has an MA, and I sing on Sundays sometimes. So, but we're gonna talk about anxiety.
And yours was honorary.
It was,
No,
man,
He earned it.
Can't even earn the MA. Okay, we're gonna be talking a little bit more about anxiety. Just a couple more questions that we didn't get to last time, and we're gonna start off with this one: is anxiety genetic? And is it passed down genetically? Steve, start with you.
an easy one.
Yeah, no trouble there. I do not believe that anxiety is a DNA thing. Nor would I say any sin is a DNA thing, because it that makes us victims, and so no, I don't believe so. Now that said, it is certainly true that the habits of life that our parents or significant people in our life growing up, that they practice, both to the good and to the bad, are very strongly impressed upon us. And we know that in maybe neutral categories. If your dad's a Cubs fan, then you tend to be one too, and you look at the world that way. If your parents are notably anxious, and if their coping mechanism to the troubles of life is to worry, to fret, then that is the course of life, the habit of life that has been modeled for you. And so that family of origin thing is, I think, so much more formative than we begin to realize. As much as maybe we say, I don't want to be like my parents or whatever, we nearly cannot escape it. Now we can, but it's very, very difficult. Anxiety, therefore, then is the good news is that it is not something that we are bound to, that we have to be anxious because this is how God made me. No. This is what sin and negative patterns of life, what they create. So it's something that Jesus can redeem, and people that were anxious can become less anxious, and maybe even not anxious as they mature and grow in their discipleship and learn to appropriate the promises of God, to live by faith, and to trust God, and a host of other things that help. So that's the encouragement. Okay, it's not sin, but it is something that it can be sanctified. It can be redeemed.
It's a really simplistic way of saying that, because I think I know where this question might be coming from, which is, my mom was anxious, so I'm anxious, right? But DNA is, my mom has brown eyes, so I have brown eyes. Now you can't help that.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is, the mom maybe acted anxious a lot, so you picked up patterns and behaviors that now you start living out as you get older. Is that a simplistic way of
we are
saying that?
very much shaped by, if your dad's an angry dad,
Yeah.
if your mom is greedy, if you're pick whatever kind of vice that you want, those are very much passed down, and in many ways, that's what I think the sin of the forefathers. The Bible has that kind of the generational sin is not it's not a DNA thing. It is the incredibly strong formative influence of a parent and a grandparent upon a child is such that it sets a direction of life. And apart from the grace of God, that is something that's a direction we stay in that direction.
I think that thing that you said about being the victim is super important to pick up on, because the DNA perspective would basically just say, I can't help it. But the way that you're saying it is you can, by the grace of God and with some help and counseling and whatever else you need to do, like those things, those patterns can be broken, right? But what would you add, Stephen, to that?
So it's interesting. What we're actually describing, there's a name for this. It's called the nature versus nurture debate. and I would agree. I don't think that anxiety can be a genetically passed down trait. I would also submit to you, if we're going to look at the research, and we talked a lot about the research in the previous episode with the various definitions of anxiety and how both secularists and people who think biblically all generally, not everybody, but most reputable people agree that anxiety is a thought-oriented distress. And as a result, if it's a thought-oriented distress, it cannot be inherently genetic in nature. So it would then make nurture, how you were raised, how things were patterned for you, what you observed, the way that you would learn anxiety as a mindset, the way you would learn it as a reactive emotion, the way you would learn it as a habituated way of thinking that would lead you to feel a negatively reactive way. So I think the data would say that. I also think another interesting thing would be to recognize part of where in culture this comes from is a secular theory called the biopsychosocial theory, and I won't wander down that rabbit hole too far. But
good, because I don't even know what you just said.
yeah, so the long and short of it is
most of the audience just clicked off.
Yeah. In the late 1700s, we had the Enlightenment, which is when humanity as a whole kind of moved away from religious thinking as a leadership model for society. I think we've talked about the Enlightenment in various sermons, just briefly at times in the past, in some way.
Please enlighten us.
Yeah. Essentially, in the late 1700s, humanity moved away from thinking religiously as a way of life, and we moved to secularism, and it's where evolution and a bunch of things came from. And one of the things that happened that was birthed out of the Enlightenment was the brain dysfunction theory and the biopsychosocial theory, which is how do we organically explain everything away? How do we explain life apart from God? And what we are talking about right now is one of humanity's ways, secularism's ways, of trying to move away from a theological way of thinking about a thing, where anxiety and other things like it have a wholly organic nature. But we know biblically, theologically, that cannot be the case. So there's a lot we can unpack there.
Yep.
I'm sure there is. No, that was good. That's why I have an MA. You have 2 PhDs. That was really helpful. What about this one that was sent in? What are some godly ways to navigate or combat, anxiety resulting from, trauma or long seasons of illness? What are some godly ways to maybe just kind of fight against that and navigate that? Start with you, Stephen.
I think that's a significant question, but I think we're talking about 3 different things there: trauma, long-standing illness, and anxiety. There are causes and there are effects there. And where I would start with someone who is battling anxiety based on one of those 2 realities is I would want to talk with them more theologically than I think practically at first. I'd want to walk them through where are the promises of God as it pertains to this long-standing illness. You are suffering clearly, and in your suffering, anxiety is rising up within you, which means that there's a cause and there's an effect. And I think dwelling on the effect wouldn't help someone long-term. I think going back and talking about the cause that led to the feelings of anxiety would probably be where I would start on this. And the same thing with trauma. Trauma comes from somewhere, and dealing with the result of the trauma isn't going to help someone as much as talking about how it is that we live life in light of it. So I would not handle this the same way that I would other things. Anxiety would be, I think healing from anxiety would be a natural byproduct of addressing the things that come before it.
So are you saying to encourage whoever sent this question, or maybe multiple people this would apply to, what would you tell them to do, I guess? Would you say go see a counselor? What would be the...
I would say, definitely go see a counselor. I think go see a counselor and talk about the distress that is associated with long-term illness, and talk with a counselor about trauma and where it came from and why it happened, because depending on the nature of what created that, the anxiety will go away as you deal with the root cause. If you're only treating the symptoms of a thing in a reactive emotion, you'll only ever get those results, but the illness isn't going anywhere likely, and the trauma you can't fix yesterday. So you've got to learn the tools to live in today, because anxiety is in effect. In this case, in the case of this question, so talking with someone about the causes would be the best possible thing they could do.
I'm going to interject something that I want to make very clear in our podcast on this subject, and that is that it's one thing to say I don't want anxiety, but what is it that you do want? And what we all want is we want peace.
Yeah.
And that concept of peace is a gift of God.
Mm-hmm.
It is also a byproduct gift of God. And so I want to make it very clear to anybody that's watching this that if you want to have the peace of God, it starts with having peace with God. Okay?
Yeah.
And that is the work of the gospel, where we are justified by faith in Jesus Christ. We therefore have peace with God. And that vertical peace that where I am made right with my Creator and I am restored spiritually to how God made me to be in relationship with Him is the foundation of and it is the application of those truths that provide us with the peace of God. Peace is a fruit of the Holy Spirit. Peace is it's what comes to us as we learn how to live by faith, not by sight. You live by sight, you're anxious about everything because the world's, always pulling apart at the seams. And my world's pulling apart at the seams. But if I live by faith, which I think is something we grow in, and we learn, and we mature, and we season, the wonderful fruit of that is that I calm down.
Yep.
I calm down, and I learn to trust God. The same God that I trusted for my eternal salvation is now, it's the same function of faith. It's not a different faith. It's the same faith applied to the circumstances of life. So if I can trust Him for my heaven-hell future, can I trust Him for, the medical exam I have on Thursday, or whatever the thing that I'm feeling anxiety about?
Yep.
And I think learning how to apply faith to the future, again, trusting in the sovereignty of God and the goodness of God, is one of the keys. So here's something that I've been learning. In fact, I talked with my wife Jennifer about this recently. Here's a negative tendency that I have that I'm currently struggling with, and I'm struggling with it in the sense that I'm wrestling it, and I want to get over it. And it's this whole concept of catastrophizing, where there is some decision to be made or there's some life circumstance, and it is very easy for me to, because my brain just does this, it just goes, and it considers all of the potential outcomes and then ranks them in likelihood. And my tendency is to overrank the worst possible outcome. They call that catastrophizing, where you and then you assume that's what's going to happen, and you live in fear and anxiety that my prophesied outcome here is going to be what's going to happen. Now, I have learned over time, rarely does my catastrophizing, that's what happens. It rarely happens. So I think, why am I doing this? Why am I living in this way? And so I would say that it goes back to, again, that desire for and understanding, how do I find peace with God? It begins with a faith relationship with Jesus, where I'm made right with God, and now I apply in the horizontal of life that same faith to the unknown but promise-filled future that I have as a child of God.
And that's what good counseling should do. In the circumstances that we're talking about, good counseling would facilitate with anybody in a circumstance where there is a thing that is overwhelming in some sense. It should affirm the vertical relationship with God and teach you skills and tools to live in that vertical relationship with God. That's why when I make counseling referrals through our church, they are only to believers that I trust to do this kind of thing to ensure, in so much as we can, that we're encouraging people in their walk with the Lord and not just, here, apply this tool. Like, we must lean into our relationship with Christ and understand the significance of it. Otherwise, we're living in knowledge but not transformation. And that is a recipe for discouragement.
That's helpful, and I think it leads to the last question, because you already went there a little bit, but I want to see if there's anything else to round it out. And that's a great foundation, faith, the gospel, Jesus' promises. But somebody wrote in, they said, what are some biblical and practical ways to manage anxious thoughts and feelings? And so let me reword that just a little bit, because you already hit that a little bit. But when the thought comes, what are biblical and practical ways to take that thought captive to Christ, right, which is from Scripture, and manage it. And, yes, we've mentioned multiple times, it might take multiple sessions with a biblical counselor or somebody to help you work through those. But is there anything for, somebody just to start today to try and apply to their lives to help them with these anxious thoughts, these anxious feelings, to at least begin the work?
I'll throw a few thoughts in here. The Bible tells us what to do with that. Philippians 4, be anxious for nothing, but in everything. Okay, so you have this like huge circle of nothing.
Yep.
Okay, don't be anxious. Here's what you're to be anxious about. Nothing. Rather, if you want to be anxious about something, or if you have energy around something, use that energy and take it to God. Pray to God about your feelings of anxiety, about the thing that you're anxious about the circumstances that are surrounding you. And it goes on to say, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your heart. And I don't think that is the objective piece of like gospel reconciliation. It is the subjective piece that we so much long for in our life, which comes as the praying reminds my soul of gospel truth and who God is. There is a peace that accompanies that and comes alongside with that. And I would also add, over time, you come to realize that the benefits of worrying. Okay, if you think about I'm gonna be fearful about this. I'm gonna worry about this. What are the benefits of my worrying? What has my worry accomplished? Has it ever made anything better? And obviously, no. It does nothing but damage. Somebody said that worry steals tomorrow's joy in today. It denies it. And so to learn to think this worrying is really detrimental. It probably isn't going to be as bad as I'm fearful as I catastrophize this. And by the way, God has promised me that He is going to meet my needs, that my future is good, that someday, no matter what happens to me, when I'm in heaven, I'm going to agree with everything that God did in my life, even the hard stuff. And then Romans 8:32, if God didn't spare His own Son but gave up for us all, how will He not also, along with Him, graciously give us all things? And so as you live you kind of bathe in the gospel, it's very hard to be really anxious about something when my soul is truly just marinating in all that the gospel tells us about who God is and what our future is in Christ.
Yeah. So I'm going to do a whole episode on another podcast that we have called Life in Progress, where I'm going to lay out a model of doing exactly what you described and then breaking it down into the practical paces that people can follow. But as you were talking literally just now, I'm like, oh, I can even summarize one right now, because there's a way that we can do it. So if you're watching, I'm going to give you 3 words, and I think this is a good first step before I would give it full detailed unpacking. The 3 words, 3 steps would be stop, breathe, think, in that order. Stop, breathe, think. Because so often people have habited themselves based on repetitious engaging and living in the feeling that they don't even know what to do. When the anxious thought comes, they're not even at a point where they can filter it out the way that we're talking about right now. So part of the tool that I'll unpack at a later time is going to be how you transition from reactive to proactive, because that's how you defeat anxiety. But for the purpose of this time, I would say the first thing you have to do is stop, because if you're already habiting yourself into the anxious feelings where it's rising within you, you have to shut that down. Stopping and then breathing, the second step, is going to be essential. Now, oftentimes when I give this to people, they're like, well, why isn't this the moment that I'm praying? Or why isn't this the moment that I go to the scripture? And what happens physiologically when anxiety starts to rise is we actually lose the ability to think clearly. When we have events like anxiety, there's other events that do this to us as well, but anxiety in particular, we well ourselves up for the potential of action. So we have a fight, flight, or freeze mechanism that takes place. In order to do that, our bodies conserve energy. So your body, without you even knowing it, starts to like shut down functions. And one of the first things that happens when anxiety rises, you stop breathing regularly, which is why people hyperventilate. It's actually one of the reasons that panic attacks happen at all, because people stop breathing regularly. Your brain needs like between 20 and 30% of the oxygen in your body at any given moment. So if you stop breathing, you're not praying because your thought isn't to pray. Your body has gone into this, what am I about to do? Like I've got to do a thing, and it might be full stop, or it might be a burst of control. So if you stop and then breathe, what is going to happen is then your spiritual vertical faculties of your relationship with Christ, you're going to manage those better because you are providing your body the resource that it needs to do that well. Whereas otherwise, if you cut off the oxygen supply, all that your brain is going to do is release more chemicals that are going to fight. They're going to prompt you to do. And when you live in that reactive state, like the definition literally describes, you're setting yourself up by and large for failure. So stop, breathe, and then think. Meditate on vertical truths. Meditate on what is true in this moment. Thinking Philippians, what is true? What is of good rapport? Think on these things. That would be the mechanism that I would encourage people. So stop, breathe, then think, then pray, then do a thing with all the resources that God has given us in our bodies to do well.
That's good. Well, hopefully this has been helpful for you as you've listened to us kind of do the best we can with a very difficult, complex, layered topic. We could talk for hours on end about this with specific illustrations, specific things we've heard about, but we try to give some more 2,000-foot view how to start the journey of battling anxiety. So hopefully you have been encouraged by Stephen's sermons that you've heard either after this is posted or before, and hopefully you've been encouraged by these episodes that are dropping. Also check out Life in Progress coming up. Lots of resources coming your way to try and battle anxiety, but may the peace of Christ, which surpasses all understanding, be with you as you go this week. We'll see you next time.